Wait, Jacinda Mack. Yaus madam, unsla nuskamada. My name is Jacinda Mack, and I come from the community of Camosun in the Shuswap Nation. I'm also from the Nukhalk Nation, and my ancestral name is Nuskamada. And Nuskamada, in our languages, a name is not just a title or just a name. It's a relationship. It's a story. It is a very embodied embodiment of my connection to where I'm from. And Nuskamada literally means place or home of moose hides. And within the context of the Nukhalk culture, it's an item, it's a treasured item. And the story that goes along with that name talks about how during the time of trade, in the beginning of time, a trail had to be cleared. And this was the Grease Trail that linked the Bellacoola Valley to our neighbors to the north of us in the Dakal communities of the Carrier Nation. And so Nuskamada, her job was to clear the path. And so my name and how I embody it is that she clears the path for the people. And so when I come and I speak, it's so that I can clear the path for the people and for the generations that follow me. So overview of the presentation, I'm going to start on a very broad basis. I'm going to talk about the context of mining on a global scale. To bring that down into the context of human rights and Indigenous relationship to mining and how this is all framed. And then I'll go into describing who we are in the Shuswap Nation, and then I'll give an update of Mount Polley mine disaster. And it's so that you have a basic understanding of why we are in the situation we're in, how we're here, how we're responding, so that you can understand the context of why we're responding the way we are and how we're involved. And the different I guess the struggles that we face and our connection to other Indigenous people in the same struggle to deal with mining. So within the broader scope of international community looking at Indigenous rights and trying to deal with all of these things that are happening worldwide, the United Nations Declaration of Indigenous Rights was issued in 2007. Article 10 states, Indigenous peoples shall not be forcibly removed from their lands or territories. No relocation shall take place without the free, prior, and informed consent of the Indigenous peoples concerned, and after agreement on just and fair compensation, and where possible, with the option of return. In 2007, there were 4 countries that refused to agree to this. It was Canada, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. And the reasoning behind that being that it sounded like a veto. This was going to stop progress. This was going to stop all of the machines that fuel our economies in the modern world, in the first world, right? Whatever you want to call it. And so there was a lot of pressure, a lot of international pressure for these countries to adopt this Article 10. It was a particular thorn in the side of governments who were having to deal with Indigenous peoples in this colonial context in these countries. And so finally, they all were kind of coerced into agreeing, yeah, okay, we'll support it in principle. It's not a law, but it's in principle, yeah, okay, we'll support it. But recently, when there was reassertions of this declaration, Canada remained the only country that said, well, actually, we really kind of don't really want to support that. It's really a veto, and you know, it's kind of going back to that original stance. And when you take that into consideration with the deregulation of Environmental Protection Acts, the Fisheries Act, you look at the aggressive agendas for industrial projects such as the tar sands, pipelines, new mines. In British Columbia, Christy Clark's platform for her party was 9 new mines and major expansions within her next term, very openly having that agenda. And after this disaster happened, those connections between corporate interests such as Imperial Metals and her party have been revealed in different media releases. So people have become, because of this disaster, much more aware and questioning and critical, having more scrutiny over what's happening not only with mining, but other industries as well. Burnaby Mountain, people are saying enough is enough. This is our backyard. And so you've got this growing consciousness and this growing awareness that things aren't right and that we're at this tipping point. I remember when I was going to school at UVic, I was in an environmental studies class, and I remember reading this article, and it said, by 2015, we're going to be at a point of no return if we don't stop what we're doing. Things have to change very radically between now and then. It's December 2014, people. We're out of time. Shuswapim uluch, my favorite word in the whole world. Shuswapim uluch, and I'd just like to acknowledge a fellow Shuswapim woman who's in the room with us tonight. Shuswapim uluch is an entire living system of interconnections. And within different indigenous languages, they have their own word for this. In our language, Shuswapim Tjin, it's Shuswapim uluch. This is the territory, this is the language, this is all of the relationships, the interconnectedness. It's our history, it's our future, it's our past. It's everything that makes us who we are. It's the land, it's the water, it's the air we breathe, it's the place names. You know, all of these things integrated into one living system in the area that we call Shuswapim uluch. It includes all of us. And so this is what we're working, this is our way of life, this is our existence that we're working so hard to protect. This is a photo of me and my babies, my son and my nieces, and we were out camping on Quesnel Lake, and it's the heart of our territory. This is the most special, sacred place. This is, for those of you who come from a Christian background, this is our Garden of Eden. This is our most special place. This water used to be so clean that you could drink directly from it without any fear that it had been contaminated. You could go out on a flat, you know, the water was flat on a clear, calm day, and you could see 80 to 100 feet down right to the bottom. It was so clear. This was the most special place that we had in our entire territory. It's the complete heart of our territory. And when we went swimming that day, I was actually supposed to be working. We had archaeologists there and we had other people. And I was like, you know, I really need to stay with the kids. You know, I'm going to hang back. And we just played in the lake all day because it was just so inviting. I just couldn't resist being in the water and being part of the land and soaking up Shuswapim uluch. And so when we were out there, the kids were so excited to be there. It was just the perfect day. And that's the last time that I swam in that lake. And that will be the last time that I'll ever swim in that lake. Their children will never know what that feels like. This is the inheritance that we've left them. Quesnel Lake, Yuchnasanchamequa, the greatest of the lakes. The greatest of the lakes in our territory. It's a very unique place in the world. It's the 6th deepest freshwater fjord lake on the entire planet. It is so deep that it doesn't move, it doesn't behave like a normal lake. It moves like an ocean. It's a living system. It's alive. It's not just a body of water. It's alive. This area is it's such a unique place in the world, and in the middle of the dry interior, you have this rainforest sitting up in the mountains. There's grizzly bears and cedar trees and alder and devil's club. You've got all of these medicines and foods. Wenuch, huckleberries, mountain huckleberries that don't grow anywhere else. People come from Alberta to come pick there. You know, we've got people that's renowned for what is there. We hunt there. We go fishing there. It's a nursery to all the species of salmon. It's this beautiful, special place. It's home to about 25% of all of the salmon in British Columbia. It's a very special place. This is a place of birth in our territory. Within our territory, we have a living culture, Shuswapim uluch, and the rites of passage that are attached to the land. These are the things, these are our way of life that we're fighting for. We're fighting for our survival. I get asked sometimes, you know, do you guys really still live that way? Like, do you really still hunt? Do you really still fish? You know, do you really pick berries? I was out at a meeting once, a public meeting, and this man says, I never see you up in those mountains. I've lived here my whole life. I've never seen you once. I said, oh, isn't that funny? Because I've never seen you either. Yes, we do still live this way. But this year, there's no sockeye in my freezer. There's no sockeye in our smokehouses. There's no sockeye in the pressure cookers to jar them for the winter because we didn't fish. When this disaster happened, it was when the salmon were traveling up to the nursery grounds. And a lot of the communities along the Fraser and the tributaries coming off of them chose not to fish because of this disaster and the pollution that had been released into the environment. And we didn't know how that was going to affect us. We didn't want to feed our little children polluted food. So a lot of people didn't fish. There were a lot of studies that were done. First Nations Health Authority took a lot of different salmon samples, and the way that the pollution builds up in the salmon, it's over time, so it takes a long time. So the ones that were swimming up, they had very short exposure to it, they said it would be okay to eat those fish. This was after they had pretty much gone through. It'd be okay to eat those fish. Just don't eat any of the organs, because those could be they're high levels of all different kinds of stuff, right? But what about all of the, they were swimming through these plumes of tailings that were in the water. They were swimming through, it was going through their gills. What about all of their spawning areas? Were they going to be able to access those creeks? Were they going to be able to get through this, this disaster? I'll show you some photos of what it looked like on the ground when this happened. We have a lot of concerns about salmon. It's going to take years and years to find out what the full effects of those impacts are, because it's going to take years to understand if those fish are going to come back or if they're slowly going to die off. We don't know. But that's a huge concern for us. Right now we're struggling with how to get salmon to our community members. When all of this happened, the people of Musqueam were so generous and that said, we have fish. We'll fish for you. We'll come bring you fish. And so they went out in their boats and they caught fish for us, and they froze it and they delivered it up to us, and we delivered it to our elders. Huge amounts of generosity. And they got a really hard time from it by DFO, Department of Fisheries and Oceans. This is out of your allotment. And they're saying, these are our relatives up on the river. They have no fish. So they've been going through a struggle with this for helping us feed our families. So we have issues around food security. So we're trying to secure some more fish for our people because they eat it on a regular basis, right? So these rites of passage, this is more than just protein on a plate. It's more than just fish on a plate and deer on a plate. Well, just switch it out with, chicken or pork or beef or whatever it is. It's more than that. It's Shuswap and P'uluk. It's the relationships. Like when you stop fishing, and you stop fishing for a long time, well, maybe you start forgetting when you're supposed to fish for that particular fish. Maybe you stop going to those places because you don't fish there anymore. Maybe you forget that, which flower was it again that's in bloom when the spring salmon are coming through? Was it the wild rose or was it the Saskatoon? I can't remember. What was the name for that again? I don't remember. We haven't done it in so long. These things start to get erased systematically from our vocabulary, from our memories, from our body. We're not eating it anymore. We live in a mineral-rich zone, the Quesnel Trough. We live in the Quesnel Trench area that's rich in gold, rich in silver, rich in copper, rich in all kinds of minerals. We have 4 operating mines in our territory: Taseko, Gibraltar, Imperial Metals, Mount Polley, Barkerville Gold Mines, QR Mine, Sona Resources, Black Dome Mine. 4 operational open mine hard rock mines. There's a lot of complexity that it comes with a mine. It's like, I say, it's like the most simple of operations and the most complex. You blast the rock, you crush it, you process it, you sell it. But the geochemistry, the testing that goes into it, the impacts, all of these things, the engineering is so complex. It's so, so complex. And so when there's an error, such as at Mount Polley, it has devastating effects. Not only do we have 4 operational mines, we have an advanced exploration mine that's proposing a brand new gold mine that would make a perfect triangle between Mount Polley, the new mine, proposed Spanish Mountain Gold, and QR Mine, all within a very close distance, within the same watershed right above the Quesnel River. So we're dealing with these pressures, this accumulation of pressures, plus we have all of the other exploration that's happening in the territory, plus thousands of placer mines that are taking place all in the creeks and the rivers throughout the territory. So we have thousands of claims. It's completely saturated in our territory, and all you need is a credit card and go online. You can buy a mineral claim off of the website. That's all you need to do. So part of the work that we're doing, a big piece, is looking at mining reform. How can we bring this up to a standard that actually meets today's requirements for mining? How can we make it safer? How can we make it more accountable? How can we as Indigenous people have a say in what's going on in our territories? So that's the work that we're engaged in. That's the work that I'm part of with my people. The Quesnel area, this is an example of there's all different mineral tenures within the area, and you can see the large blue fork that goes up. It's the Quesnel Lake, so that's the north arm. We've got endangered caribou, grizzly bears. We have all kinds of endangered species that are living in the area because they're getting pushed out too. They're getting displaced just as we are. This shows some of the pressures on the land there. If you look on a detailed map, you'll see that everything has been divided into this grid of mineral claims, and all of them have been completely bought up. 75% of the gold mined today is for jewelry. And then gold, people say, oh, we need to mine gold. We need it. We need it for electronics. We need it in medical, equipment, or we need it for these different things. The truth is that almost all of the gold that's mined today is for jewelry. It's a luxury item. It's a status symbol. There's enough gold that's already been mined in the world that we don't have to mine one more ounce of gold, right? So when I started in my job, I didn't know anything about mining. I've only learned the last couple of years. Like, I mean nothing. I knew nothing. When I was learning about gold and I was learning about, all of these other metals, it really struck me that gold is not necessary. We don't have to have it. We just want it. And so when you're thinking about gold, I hope that you think about the total cost of what that gold is attached to, because it comes at a very, very big price. Depending on the concentration we'll take gold as the example here because it's really the driving factor behind mining in our territory. Depending on the concentration, you can have an 80-ton haul truck, 80 tons in one truckload. This is a small truck. This is the little truck. For one single ring. It's not just the rock that's in that truck. You think of all of the resources that went into mining the materials to make that truck. Where did that come from? What about those tires made of rubber? We don't have rubber in our territory. That comes from the jungles. So, who was displaced to make those tires? Those tires are $35,000 a piece. And they can't recycle them. They don't have the facilities to do it. So they work it into the reshaping the landscape on the mine sites. What about the diesel that truck's burning? Those trucks run 24 hours a day. Mining runs 24 hours a day. It never shuts down. The mills run 24 hours a day. Where did that diesel come from? Was it from fracking in northern Alberta? Was it from fracking somewhere else in the Americas or maybe in the Middle East? Who lived there before? What about the displacement of the animals? What was the water that was polluted to get that diesel into that truck? Well, how did that truck get loaded? Gigantic electric shovels. Electric, well, that means you need to have a hydro dam. That means you need to have a hydro line. So when you add up all of the costs, I paid about $50 for this. What's the true cost and who is bearing that cost? I don't buy jewelry anymore. I have these have very special sentimental value to me, and they also keep me aware of, what is the true cost. And so the work that I do is kind of try to appease that guilt that I have for having these luxury items. And so I always encourage people to question, is it a want or is it a need? Chief Bev Sellers said, well, our economy swims by in the river. It's the clean water and clean air. It includes the animals that we hunt and the plants that we gather. It is our medicines and our place names. It is the land and water itself. We must take care of it to survive. Not only that, but it is our responsibility to take care of it for all of the generations of life that come after us. It's not just human beings. It's not just the people of Shuswap and P'uluk. It's for all of you. It's for your children and your grandchildren. It's even for the grandchildren of the mining company executives who are doing this to us. We're all in this together. It's for the deer. It's for the salmon. It's for the air. It's for the intrinsic value of life itself. This is the economy that we're talking about, that we operate in, that our worldview comes from. This is where we're coming from. Last November, Chief Bev Sellers from Khatsuls, from my community, was asked to attend a conference in South America. She went to Lima, Peru for a week, and she met with other Indigenous leaders from South America. And she was brought there to talk about the relationship of Indigenous peoples in Canada and their relationship with Canadian mining companies. And for those of you who don't know, Canada is the world leader in mining. 70% of the world's mining companies are in Canada, and they're mostly in Vancouver. So Vancouver is the mining hub of the world. And the reason that it's the mining hub of the world is because the laws here around mining are so slack. It's a very good place to do business if you're a mining company, because most of the legislation we're dealing with still comes from the 1860s. So the work that we do is to really push for mining reform to bring these practices up to a safer and more accountable place in the world. It's like if we're going to be the mining hub of the world, it should be at a standard that is at least safe and, looking at the best practices of where they do things differently in other places of the world. So she met with these indigenous leaders down there, and there was one chief from Ecuador who said, we're getting a lot of pressure to give up our way of life. We're getting a lot of pressure to be part of this modern economy. And one of his community members said, well, maybe we should think about that. Maybe we should think about joining this economy. Would it be so bad? What would that look like? And the chief said, well, let's have a little experiment. Let's think about that. He said, we'll eat our banana soup, and they can eat their gold, and we'll see who survives. So this brings us to the Northern Shuswap mining policy. This was released on December 1st, 2014, and this is our response to mining in our territory. This mining policy does not say you have to shut down all mining in this country. It does not say we are wanting no more mining, a moratorium. This is not what this policy is about. This policy is about taking all of the best practices worldwide and putting them into one place to say this is our minimum standard for doing business in our homeland. If you want to come in, you've got 4 operational mines. How are we going to deal with you? We're going to be proactive and prescriptive on how we want you to do business and how we want you to operate in our territory. We released a press release on Monday morning on December 1st, and by noon, downloads started. We've made this policy available to everybody. It's free. It's public. Use it, share it, download it, look at it, learn from it. It's the best practices from around the world. Highly researched by the Fair Mining Collaborative, Amy Crook, here in British Columbia. She works quite closely with us. She's a fisheries biologist. She was involved in the responding to the Exxon Valdez in the 80s. And she's super knowledgeable. And she would hear over the last 30 years of her career from different communities, well, what's the best practice? What's the best we can ask for? Let's ask for that. And so they compiled this huge amount of research with all of the laws attached to it and the practices. And she came up with this amazing piece of work of what the best practices actually are, and that's what our policy is based on as the start. It's a living document, and it'll be added to and adjusted as time goes on and things progress. But we think it's a really good place to start. The industry and government is saying, yes, we totally think that best practices, absolutely. And so then we slam this on the table and say, well, here it is. It doesn't get any better than this right now. It could get better, but we think it's a really good place to start. So this is, dealing with mines that are already operational. But it also looks at any proposed developments in our territory. It looks at what are the cumulative effects. People don't connect the dots between forestry and mining. Well, when forestry goes in, it clears the land, and then pretty soon it's like, oh, the land's already been disturbed. Let's throw some drill holes down there. Let's do some exploration. This is a highly mineralized zone. We know we're going to find something eventually. So the map that I put up before, you can see all of the different mineral claims that are completely saturate our territory. When there's forestry in there, the clear cuts, you can almost be guaranteed when you drive into a clear cut in the mountains in our territory, you're going to see a drill pad that's been sealed off for exploration. And a lot of it saying, oh, we're just drilling a couple of holes. It looks like Swiss cheese out there. There's so much exploration going on. It's overwhelming. When I started to learn about mining and understand what it was that they were doing and what these different things were, I was just like, it's everywhere. I just didn't see it before because I didn't know. Double hull concentrate truck. It's coming out of these mines, the loading docks for the train. You look at the steep hills and the rugged terrain that these big trucks are traveling down. It's in the mountains, there's ice and snow. We had, 2 years ago, we had a copper concentrate truck dump right into the creek that flows right by my mother's house. They didn't even tell us about it. We read it in the paper. And I was a natural resources manager at the time, and my mother was the chief, Bev Sellers. We went to go check it out. Everything had been vacuumed up. Oh, it's all good. Don't worry about it. It's like, we didn't even know. We have one agreement, and it's with Mount Polley mine. We don't have agreements with any of the other mines in our territory. So this is a really complicated, complex situation where we finally do have an agreement. We have our people working at these mines. We have these connections, but we also have a lot of concerns around what the impacts are to the environment and what our relationship to the land is being stressed by. So the policy will be implemented over the next months, and the first testing grounds will be with Mount Polley mine. So we have lots of meetings set up where we're going to be talking about what those next steps are. It'll also be meeting with other mines in our territory to say, okay, you know, there might be some things that everybody agrees to quite readily. You know, it's hard to say. They'd be like, yeah, maybe we're already doing that, but it's just not in BC law, right? So working with the provincial government and working with the specific companies to look at what those changes could be. Those are the conversations that we have to have. But this policy, what it does is it sets up that framework for those discussions. So companies will often say, well, we don't really know what you want. You know, we don't understand your culture or where your values are coming from or how that translates into mining practice. Well, now they do, right? So it's a very proactive approach to dealing with them in their own language, but it's based on the values and best practices that we have as Indigenous people. Imperial Metals Mount Polley mine. This is a little mine. This isn't a big mine. When I started to learn about mining, the thing that I was struck by most is the scale of mining. It's beyond anything I'd ever seen. You know, you've got 80-ton trucks, you know, where the tires are, you know, 12 feet high, and you're just like, wow, this is huge. It's like driving around these buildings, you know, that are these big dump trucks. The big shovels, you know, it's just like you're this little, you know, this little tiny little ant on the ground, and you're standing in this mine pit, and you're just going, whoa, this is crazy. This is so big. I didn't know that things were so big, right? And so when you're looking at this photo, you've got the mine pit, and you can see that it's surrounded by water. And the way that the geology, the way that the landscape works in our territory is that there's lots and lots of water there, and there's also lots and lots of gold. And you need a lot of water to process mining because you crush the rock and you have to mix it with a lot of water. You have your reagents and your flotation system that brings all of this, so say, for example, gold, silver, copper, to the surface. That's skimmed off the top. All of the waste settles to the bottom, and then all of that slurry, that's the waste, gets piped out to the tailings storage facility. And then once it's piped out there, the sediments drop out, and the sediments drop out, and then the water, like in any suspended mixture, you'll notice that it'll drop out, and then the water on top will be more clear. So that's what happens in tailings storage facility. And then so what, in the original mine plan, they had what was called a closed circuit system. So they would reuse the water over and over again, and it would settle out, and they just keep using the top water off of the tailings storage facility. It's called supernatant. So they would use this, but what has happened, and within talked about the agenda of new mines and expansions, when commodities are high, when the price of gold is almost $1,800 an ounce, you start thinking about expanding and expanding the mine life so that you can make more money. And that's what's been happening across the province. We want to expand. We want a new mine. Even if the ore deposits are really low concentrations, it means you have to have a much bigger mine. As long as you can make a really good profit on that, mines are willing to do that. Well, we'll just mine more because we know that we're going to eventually make this much money, the projections that they have, the criteria, the justification for why there has to be a mine there. Economically, this is a depressed region, and we need to go in and we need to get that gold out of the ground. These are the things that they say. So in this photo, the long lake on the left is Polley Lake, and on the right is Bootjack Lake, and then off in the distance, about 10 kilometers away, is Quesnel Lake. So when I started in my job, one of the first things that came across my desk was this permit review for amended mine permit to expand. Because they're wanting to do underground mining, they're wanting to expand on the ore bodies that they had. They wanted to expand, and part of that expansion would be to expand the tailings storage facility because they're going to be creating more waste. So originally the mine plan was for a certain amount of years, which would be, so if the original mine plan, the tailings storage facility would be this big, with the expansion, well, the tailings facility had to be bigger too, or you had to look at other options. Maybe you weren't going to store it underwater. And the reason they store it underwater is so that it's an anaerobic environment, so it stops the oxidation process and the acidification within the tailings within the waste, right? We're really lucky in that Mount Polley is in an area where it has a low potential for acid generation. It doesn't mean zero potential, but it's low potential, so that's good. But the process of how those metals become available into the environment, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, if it's going to happen, or when it's going to happen, or to what degree. So we have more unanswered questions than we do have answers. We're 4 months into this process. We're going to be looking at this for the rest of my life. My children are going to be dealing with this. Your children and grandchildren are going to be dealing with the aftermath of this. And so this is a photo of the tailings storage facility when there was still water in it. And you can't really tell from the photo, but it's a really light green color, and this is quite characteristic of tailings facilities. And one of the main things that they mine for here is copper, and copper often shows as green. You often see it on the copper buildings that has copper on it, turns that green color. It's the same. So Polley Lake, this is the lake that I was talking about in the slide, and this is right below the mine site. And that little tiny mound that's on the picture there, that's the last of Mount Polley. That's the last remaining intact piece of this mountain. So when a mine is approved, you have a mountain, and when a mine is approved, a mountain is sacrificed and it becomes a pit. So you take this highly complex system and you turn it into a pit that is then covered with, in this reclamation process that has returned it back to the land. And it's something that, we have to deal with because this is going on in our territory, so we have to deal with it. When this mine was put in, we had no say in the whole process. We weren't consulted in any way. This mine was opened early in 1997. Of course, this was before the Delgamuukw decision that said that there was a duty to consult, so it slid in right under the wire. And so in that time, so it took 15 years for us from that decision to finally get an agreement. And that agreement that would address jobs for our community members, that would address training opportunities, that would address community development money for our community. Because what happened when this mine went in is that this buffer became, people kind of put this buffer around the area that you would traditionally harvest in or hunt in. And it just became a little bigger and a little bigger as the mine got bigger because, one, you couldn't go on the site anymore. It was illegal to go in there without permission. You couldn't hunt in the area anymore because it was unsafe. You couldn't pick berries in there or foods in the area anymore because there's dust that comes off a mine site. Any open pit mine in British Columbia always has a problem with dust. And you think, oh, it's just dust. Well, no, it's not. It's mining dust, and it's laden with heavy metals. And so if you're breathing that in, that's going into your body system, you're going to have some problems, right? 1 a.m., August 4th, 2014, an alarm goes off in the mill. We've got no water. Manual shutdown, hard shutdown. People are upset. Who screwed up? We've got no water. Somebody go check it out now. Dispatch a staff member. He goes down onto the dam. There's no lights. There should be lights. Where's all the lights? How come all the lights are out? He turns down his music and he can hear this roar. The dam had failed. 25 billion liters of mining waste spilled out over the course of the next 12 hours into the environment. This legally obliged containment storage for the tailings, you have to have it contained. You can't release it into the environment. There's containment ditches all around a mine site. You have to gather all of the contact water that comes into anything contact with the mine and gather it, collect it all up, and put it back in the tailings storage facility. By law, you have to. The dam broke. It failed. But 30% of the tailings left this tailings storage facility and all of the water. So what happened was when the dam failed, the water, of course, the supernatant that's sitting on top started to move. And so all of the water started to mobilize. And then once the kinetic energy of the water starts moving, it started to mobilize all the tailings underneath it. So the water that came out flowed directly into Polley Lake, and then the tailings followed, and then it built up, and it formed this plug. And then the natural drainage of the mountain, that's where the waste turned down, and it went down about 10 kilometers down to Quesnel Lake. Between the arrows, you can see that's where the dam failure occurred. In the background is the tailings storage facility. The tailings came down into Polley Lake, and you can see that color again from the tailings, the green. The water in the lake was raised between 5 and 6 feet on the entire lake. Huge volumes of water over 12 hours. So when the tailings turned and went down the mountain, Hazeltine Creek used to be about 4 feet wide in the natural drainage. It turned down, and all of that area, that's supposed to be, all of that should be covered in trees. It took out the forest with it. The force of what came out of that tailing storage facility took out all of the trees, the forest, all of the soils right down to bedrock and scoured it for 10 kilometers. Amazingly, nobody was killed. No human people were killed. So as I said before, Hazeltine Creek was about 4 feet across. It was a low-flow stream. It was a spawning channel. When we first found it, we weren't sure that we had actually found the creek because it kind of looked more like a ditch. And this was the creek, a very small little creek. And you can see in the picture on the left the forest that was around it and the shade. And it was a very good little spawning channel. Coho went in there and trout, and they would access Hazeltine up into Edney Creek and up to Polley Lake. So when this disaster happened, it came down the mountain. You can see, and if you've seen pictures before, it's all the way down the mountain. It pushed all of the forest right out. Down in the lower areas, right at the delta, that's where it was widest. It kind of flattens out from the canyon, and then it just, flowed out. There's trees that came down, and you see the green plume. If you heard about the plume in the media, the plume is moving. That's what they're talking about. So you have all of these here. And likely is down that direction. If you keep going, going off that way, then you're going to come on the town of Likely, and that's where the Quesnel River starts. So people assumed in the beginning, it's going to get flushed out into the Quesnel River system, and then it'll go into the Fraser. And there was all of these concerns about, what's going to happen with the Fraser? But like I said before, Quesnel Lake isn't your typical lake. What happened was the plume turned and went the other way and started going up the lake. And so people were like, whoa, we didn't expect that. And right below Hazeltine Creek, right at the mouth of the creek, there's a big trench down in here. There's a big trench in the lake. And so a lot of the tailings fell into that trench and went clear across to the other side of the lake. And a lot of people said, well, it's actually better for them not to be exposed to the environment in Hazeltine Creek. It's actually better for them to be underwater, right? Because it slows this oxidation process. It slows this acid forming process. But Quesnel Lake turns over twice a year. It rolls over in the fall when the temperature, the stratification of the lake starts to cool and it starts to mix. Well, the whole lake turns over. So the tailings that are sitting at the bottom of the lake don't necessarily stay at the bottom of the lake. It turns over. And so as we could see with the plume moving up the lake, it's moving in different ways that people didn't necessarily anticipate. The researchers on the Quesnel River Research Center, that's their baby, Quesnel Lake and the Quesnel River. They know all about it, and they're saying, yeah, as soon as it starts to cool, the lake's going to start to mix. You're going to see those sediments. You're going to see that color moving, and that's exactly what's been happening. So what happens in the springtime is it mixes again because you have the runoff at freshet in May and June. You've got literally spontaneous creeks and rivers that are coming down the mountains. It's a rainforest. It's full of snowpack. When it's all melting, it comes down, and that's part of the ecosystem there. Well, there's still tailings remaining in Hazeltine Creek. There's still tailings up top at Polley Lake. What is that going to look like, right? So there's a lot of concerns around the water containment and around the tailings containment, and that's where the bulk of the work has focused on. The reason those tailings haven't been loaded up in dump trucks and brought back up to the mine is because, one, the tailings storage facility where they originally were has failed. It's not safe to put them in there right now. It's not safe to be working in that area because of the plug that was up top could remobilize. So they had to do a lot of containment work to make sure that it was safe. This is the slurry that I was talking about. So this is the waste that would come out of the mill after it's been processed. And so this is what would actually be piped to the tailings storage facility. So all of this came rushing down the mountain and scoured all the way down into the lake. And I found out about this on Facebook. I saw a video that had been posted by the RCMP in the Caribou Regional District saying this is what's happening. And I knew exactly where they were talking about. I'd been on that dam. I'd been out on that mine site. I'd been below there. I knew what it looked like. I knew that creek. I knew where the discharge site was. I was there over 2 years. I knew that place. I knew exactly where it was. And I knew the magnitude of what was happening. And then I saw the video and I cried. And the response in our communities was that it was a death. It was a death. That's how people felt. And our communities gathered together on the 4th and on the 5th. So what's going on? What's happening? Somebody tell us something. And, you know, there was just this chaos that was happening. There's this chaos. Well, have you heard from the mine? Have they called? And what about the Cariboo Regional District? And what about, you know, who have we been talking to? And it was just everybody was in a state of shock and lots of tears and lots of anger. And the community of Likely that was directly impacted, you know, people that live right on the lake and draw water from the lake, what's going to happen to them? Are they safe? Can they drink the water? All of these things. So there was a water ban that was put in place and a state of emergency that was issued. The state of emergency is still in effect, and when the Cariboo Regional District issued a local state of emergency, what it did is it authorized emergency work to happen without the long permitting process. We need to remove logs. They're a threat. We need to do it now. You're authorized. We need to, you know, put a water ban on until we know what's going on. Authorized. We need to shut down roads because it's a safety hazard. Authorized. There's just not this long process because it's an emergency state that you have to respond to. They're now talking about lifting that state of emergency 4 months later. This is what the community of Likely's been living in, a state of emergency for 4 months with no clean drinking water. So this is what has been happening in the communities. You know, I've been to almost every community meeting that's been held in Likely. Lots of fear, lots of frustration. People saying, when are we going to get clean water? When are, you know, what are we going to do? You know, my big organic garden, this is why I live out here, because I can have this big garden, because I can be in the mountains, you know. Their connection to the land is similar to our connection to the land. They choose to live there. They choose to have that lifestyle. Not having water, can you imagine not having water for 4 months? The closest place where they can purchase water is an 1.5 hour drive away. This has been a huge hardship on the community of Likely. One woman talked about how she still has nightmares. They've been traumatized by this. People worried about their jobs and their families. You know, so there's so many questions that need to be answered, and we really do, in every way we can, support the community of Likely. And, you know, they're going through this with us, but they're the front lines of who's been impacted in all of this. So I talked about a bit of the work that's been done to date. I've heard in the media and different people saying, Mount Polley Mines has done nothing. They've done nothing, and that is not true. They have been busy since about 1 in the morning, August 4th, 2014, trying to deal with this. I've heard people say, "Oh, it was on purpose." You know, this is a big, you know, it's how all these theories of, you know, it was done on purpose. No, this is a catastrophic fail. This is a catastrophic event, a disaster. You know, there's no way that they would put themselves in a position to lose that much money in such a short amount of time. You know, it's those things, it's all fear. People are filling the blanks with fear because they don't have access to information to be informed. They've been very busy doing work, containment work, ensuring the safety. When the event happened, the areas of the tailing storage facility, they had to build these big rock berms. These were canyons that had been created where the tailings had emptied. They had to block the entrance to where the breach site was. They had to make sure that none of this remobilized with fall rains. You know, you get that water built up, the interstitial water, all the water that goes between all the pieces, it could move again. It could cause another event. So they had to make sure that that didn't happen. They had to contain it. So you have this poly plug, so when the water came out of the dam, a lot of that water flowed into here and wiped all of these trees out, and you can see some of the tailings that have been deposited there. Well, the tailings built up to the point where it had to turn. And so this poly plug is sitting at the natural drainage point of Polley Lake. So they had to pump down Polley Lake that about almost 2 meters of water. So they ran two 22-inch pipes from the lake around this plug because they didn't want to remobilize this plug. They ran it around and emptied down into Hazeltine Creek. And it was basically the lesser of two evils, right? You don't want all of this to mobilize and all of this to mobilize. You have to contain it. You have to stop the bleeding, right? And so all of this work was going on, and you had the state of emergency, so people couldn't get access to areas that they previously could access to, not the mine site, but the public road, because it wasn't safe anymore. So people were saying, they're keeping us out, it's a cover-up, they're doing nothing, and it's because there was no information that was coming out to the wider public. To the people in Likely, there were regular information sessions, and with our community, there was regular information sessions. But when you're so involved in responding to this, when you're so involved and you're so, busy trying to figure out what's happening, you don't have a whole lot of time to be writing press releases and doing newspaper articles because you're doing the work. So part of what I'm doing with this speakers tour and going out is to talk to people directly in communities and say, this is what's been done. You've heard it from me. You've had a chance to ask questions directly to get that information out there. The other thing that I've heard is there's been zero cleanup. That too is also untrue. The cleanup that has been happening over the last few months has been to get all of the trees, the forest, the woody debris that came down the mountain into the lake, out of the lake. At the state of emergency that was issued, they needed to remove the woody debris, the trees, from the lake because there was a threat to the bridge at Likely. It could take out the bridge, right? And then the people in Likely would be at risk. So the cleanup that has happened over the last few months has focused on removing all of the trees and the woody debris. And you'll notice in the photographs that all of these trees have no bark on them. All of the bark was stripped off by the scouring, the rock flour, the slurry. And so where did that bark go? Well, it's down at the bottom of Quesnel Lake. And of course, you can imagine what kind of problems that would have caused for the fish who are traveling through the area and trying to spawn in those areas. So you have these layers and layers and layers of what is happening. And this, our community members from the Northern Shuswap have been involved in the cleanup efforts to get, this is a huge amount of trees that are in the lake, and a lot of the shore cleanup and everything that's been happening to get it out of the lake. And so this is the cleanup and containment that's been happening over the last few months. So there has been a lot of work that has been done, but it hasn't been going in right away with dump trucks and shovels and loading and bringing it back and just, refilling the TSF, because you can't do that. It's a failed engineered structure now, so you have to have a different approach. So one thing that came up at a community meeting about a week ago is that people who have been involved in this cleanup process and they're burning these trees along the shoreline that can't be brought out are getting sick. People are getting pneumonia and they're getting really bad headaches and they're just getting sick in general. And people are saying, well, you're burning the wood that has tailings on it. Is that a problem? And so this is something that was just brought up, and people were saying, I didn't even think of that, right? And so the smoke that's coming from these burn piles that have been going for the last few months flow right into the community of Likely. So one of the questions we asked was about, well, is Quesnel Lake going to be cleaned up? What about the tailings, the bulk of the tailings that's in Quesnel Lake? So that's something that we haven't seen a plan, and that would also be part of the phase 2 in terms of the cleanup plan, the remediation plan for the tailings. So we have this unnatural green plume that's moving through the lake and the river. And this is very concerning to people who know what that river and the lake is supposed to look like. The visual impact, it's very depressing. It's created a lot of anxiety in the community because there's so much uncertainty and there's so much fear. So you have the Ministry of Energy and Mines, and they have their mandate and responsibilities over here. And you have the Ministry of Environment, their mandate and responsibilities over here for the environment and for the mine. And what you have in between is all of the sociocultural, health, and economic pieces that are impacting communities and impacting the landscape. This isn't addressed very well at all. And so we have put forward a proposal to say we want to handle that work. We want to be leading this. We want to be designing this and working with other agencies such as First Nations Health Authority, such as different kinds of research facilities, doing the work within our own communities. And this is something that at the it's called the senior officials table, that the ministers were saying, yes, we do think that this is important work, and this is supported at that level. So this is really kind of groundbreaking work, as well with the mining policy. So it is breaking new ground in some areas. It's these tiny steps forward. It's saying, okay, let's look at the best practices. Okay, well let's lead this piece. Let's co-design this piece. In the 2 months, the time after the disaster, the amount of progress that we had made with the government and with the mine was more in those 2 months that we've had in the last 20 years. You know, what a horrible, horrible event to have to happen in our territory to make this. But, you know, because of the work that we're doing, because of the high level of scrutiny that the public is demanding on this, responding to this, there were other, and the inspections on the new facilities at the Red Chris mine, which is also operated by Imperial Metals in Tahltan territory, there were flaws that were found in the design. It was based exactly on the one at Mount Polley. So that's good that they caught it before it filled up, right? So, you know, there's these successes, there's successes. You know, if that prevented something in Tahltan territory, man. So in facing the aftermath, there are so many things that we're dealing with. I talked about there was a feeling that there was a death when this happened. There are village areas all around this lake. And where this came down the mountain, there were documented village sites and homes that were in that area. And in a lot of these places during the time of smallpox, people would crawl into these, the winter homes to die because it was like a grave and the families would go together. And so this was memorial areas, these were graveyards, right? And so when all of this happened, they were impacted by the first gold rush, and then they were impacted again in this disaster. And so the aftermath of all of this mining waste that's in these water systems of Polley Lake and Hazeltown Creek and Quesnel Lake, what is that going to mean? You know, we're looking at this for long term. And what is the bioaccumulation going to be in the food chain? What's going to happen to the salmon? You know, all these questions that we're faced with, and it's going to take a long time to find answers to it. This is what we're dealing with. You know, this is what I'm going to be dealing with for the rest of my life in that area. The people of Likely, what's going to happen to them? All of these concerns, you know, these are real people. This is really happening, and even though it seems really far away, we're all interconnected in a way. You know, who's to say that the salmon that isn't caught right out here wasn't born in Quesnel Lake, right? You don't know where that water's moved. You don't know where those tailings are going. There's a lot of challenges in responding. Like I talked about before, we have a very small community with limited resources and not a lot of money, and this is really, really expensive to deal with this. It costs a lot to send samples to a lab. It costs a lot to bring in experts to be doing this co-design process. We've got overwhelming amounts of information. We don't have entire staff of people. We can't keep, it's very difficult for us to keep up with a multi-million-dollar, multi-billion-dollar corporation, right? Across our territory with all of the impacts that are happening. You know, things change really quickly, and trying to keep up is very challenging. And we have complex connections between our communities and these companies. We have an impact benefit agreement with the company. You know, we have a revenue sharing agreement with the government. We have community members who work at these mines, you know. So we've got these complex relationships. It's not cut and dry. It's very complicated. And so we're trying to deal with this, you know, internally and also externally with the wider world and with the companies. So it's all very, very involved and complex. Northern Shuswap Tribal Council, this is the name of our collective 4 communities of Tlachel, Tzkashkin, Chatsul, and Chaitlam. And these are the 4 northern communities that have come together within the BC Treaty process as the NSTQ, Northern Shuswap Tribal Council, the northern people of the Shuswap Muluch. And so we're pushing for this mining policy that we've delivered to government, that companies have been looking at in our territory and asking us about. It's been downloaded over 700 times in the last 36 hours. So that's pretty exciting, yeah. And, you know, I was holding the mining policy the other night. I was giving a presentation in Courtney, and I said, you know what? This is a love story right here. This mining policy is a love story. This is thousands of hours of work by very dedicated people who care so much. And this is for everybody's benefit. And so you wouldn't think of a piece of policy, that mining policy, to be a love story, but that's what it is. It addresses 5.6 million hectares. This is the northern spectrum of Shuswap and Muluch. And I talked a bit about the letter of understanding with British Columbia, and a key piece of that is the mining reform. Right, so we're involved in all of these different levels. In the political, legal level, we're involved with the environmental assessments, the human social impacts. We're looking at how we can bring the standard up in our territory and for other people around the world. When our chief traveled down to Lima, Peru, to talk with the indigenous people of South America, you know, maybe we can translate it into Spanish and we can share it with them and say, this is what we're doing in Canada. You know, how exciting would that be, right? So this is a pebble in the water, and where those ripples go. It's so great to have all of you out here, because your job really becomes to share this story, to share this and to tell people about it and keep this alive in the hearts and minds of the people, and to bring this, the correct information out there where there's these holes that are being filled with fear and speculation, because that doesn't help anybody, right? So one example of mining reforms is, gee, maybe we should have a disaster response plan worked into the laws in British Columbia. And that maybe these response plans should be using worst case scenario. Maybe these disaster response plans should be part of the environmental assessment on any new mine or any new development. And maybe they should have a bond attached. They should have a significant amount of money that's put aside to pay for the cleanup in the event that this happens. These are the types of things that we're dealing with. When this disaster happened and we met with the mining, we said, okay, well, what's your disaster response plan? What are you going to do? And they said, we don't have one. And how could you not have one? Well, it's not law. We don't have to have one. It's not legislated. It's like, whoa, well, how are you going to pay for this? And people are saying, well, they have a bond. No, that's a reclamation bond. That's for closure. That's very specific to mine closure. You can't use that. I said, well, we have insurance, but pending the investigations, who knows what that insurance, if it'll be usable or not. So everything is it's up in the air right now. So in the next few months, there's going to be a lot of things happening. So it's going to be a very interesting time. So when I think about, you know, the work that I do, people say, oh, well, geez, you've got this crazy schedule, and, you know, the support that I've received from so many people that allows me to do the work that I do, it's really, you know, and to have so many people here tonight, it's really, really great. And, you know, I think about these girls in this picture, and I think about, you know, their connection to the land and how it's changing so quickly. I think about my great-grandmother and the life she had, and then the life I had, and the life they have. What is going to be left for their grandchildren? What is going to be left for your children's grandchildren? What is that going to be? What is their inheritance going to be? You know, Thomas King says that, you know, the truth about stories is that that's all we are. The stories that we tell, these are the stories of our lives. And he said, you can't go back after you've heard a story. You can't undo that. You can't say, if only I had known, if only I had heard that story. You've heard the story tonight. So what is the story going to be that you tell your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren when they come to you and they say, what did you do? You were alive when this happened. What did you do? Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.